Hey, Sucha, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Lovely to see you today and chat about all things animal-based foods.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, so Sucha, just introduced, she is an incredible fitness, yogi, coach, like all things health and well-being. She runs her own retreats that started off as being plant-based retreats. She's got a YouTube channel. She shares all of her journey there as well, so check it out. And she's recently made the transition of adding animal foods back into her diet, which we're going to dive into why and just everything about that. But she's incredible, and I'm very excited to talk more deeply on this topic with her.
Yay. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited that we got to connect. And I think we both come from a place that was maybe more in the culture of like way into, plant-based eating, and plants are
Mhm.
medicine. But I think sometimes overdoing it can actually cause a lot of distress and inflammation. So being able to get to this point and also really deciphering like why meat isn't the bad guy and why like meat can actually be more medicine. So I'm really excited
Mm.
to dive into both of our journeys with that. And one big switch actually that I just made is like my business Live Bliss, where I do retreats and classes through, was foundational on actually plant-based living and like mostly vegan food. But this upcoming
Mhm.
retreat is going to be the first retreat that actually is going to be more animal based actually, and just incorporate a lot of
Mm.
those foods. I know we're going to get into this later, but just as far as like introducing the regenerative side and what's actually
Mhm.
sustainable, I think that's going to be huge too.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing because there's so many things that come into this topic. It's not just animal foods heal, and that there's just so much, and it's so deep. And um, especially with plant-based foods, there's a lot of people that would argue that they can be healing and they have healed conditions, but it's more the long term and the lifestyle and sustainable for our health over like 10, 20, 30 years. And especially with being purely plant-based, like veganism, that's never actually been done in human history. And it is kind of a new thing that's only started up in the past 10 years or so. Whereas what we're talking about is more of an ancestral way of living, right? That's been proven for so many years. And really returning to agriculture that promotes that is in harmony with the earth as well as with our own physiology, our own gut health, everything. So I'd like to just start with asking you a bit about your transition and what made you switch from plant-based to adding in animal foods, especially when your whole business was plant-based.
Yeah. And yeah, everything you said, 100% agree. So my transition, I would say, was kind of like accidental, but I think there is probably something like more innate in me that led me to the transition. So
Mhm,
to keep it as short as possible,
mhm,
I've always had this fascination with primal living. And when I was taking classes in college, like even taking the biological anthropology class, that was like so fascinating to me to this day. Like I still
mhm,
reference the book. So with movement, creating something like movement fusion, that was definitely like full on primal movement. But something was still not clicking as I got deeper into primal studies as far as like food goes, because at that point I
mhm,
was super like eating all vegan, plant based. And on top of that, since I love to lift weights and I love to work out with intensity, and I do have a focus of like building muscle and performance. Um,
mhm,
I was like, there's literally no way I could do this diet, as in eating vegan, without the dependence on like protein powders and tofu and nuts,
mhm,
nut butters. And I had never really been into grains and legumes. Like I would say that's
mhm,
more paleo. They just didn't
mhm,
sit well with me. And I was definitely intrigued with not necessarily eating strict keto, but really increasing my fats and proteins, because it's just absolutely right there in front of us that higher fats
mhm,
and proteins are amazing, especially for women.
mhm,
So
mhm,
I made the decision to travel actually, and I was living in India and Thailand for a few months. And I was
Mhm.
actually like in a smaller town in Thailand where if you didn't eat rice, like your only other option was like meat or eggs. And I was like, well, I'm not just going to have like buckets of white rice. And I was training
Yeah.
Muay Thai, like martial arts training. So I was just like, it was kind of, I wouldn't say forced, but I was like, all right, like there's literally nothing here. So I'll just have some eggs. And I was just starting to have omelets and I felt great. Um, like felt really energetic. I didn't really pay too much attention to it because at that time I was just like, okay, well, I don't have my vegan options here, so I'm going to eat
Mhm.
this. Um, when I went to India, I was also staying in like a smaller town. So there's no such thing as like kale and broccoli there. It's just not part of the climate. It is like
Mhm.
very humid. So they had coconuts and they had coconut stuff and then like very lush fruit, but there was no like green leaves and green veggies. And I was like
Mm.
so attached to those. And I was just like, what do people eat here if there's no kale and broccoli? Like we're being taught that we need to have so much kale and broccoli, but it's literally not available in other parts of the countries.
Yeah.
And tons of people in India have like rice and lentils and legumes, but their health is definitely not 100%. It's like they're
Yeah.
suffering from that because they're consistently in that carb burning mode and it's like so much
Mm.
fiber. So in that sense, I was definitely incorporating fruits. I used to be super scared of fruits, but
Mhm.
also there was some access to eggs at that time. So basically, I'd incorporated some eggs and it was okay. And I came back and I was going to like get back to my life of working, but COVID happened right when I got back. So instead of
Mhm.
finding a new place to live, I ended up moving back in with family. And my
Mhm.
dad is actually really big into like eggs and meat. He does a lot of seafood, and that's something we always used to have fun with eating. And I was
Mm.
like, all right, like this is the only time I'm really spending time with family. So I cooked a lot of plant-based stuff, but I was like, I'm just gonna like experiment and see what it feels like to bring in some seafood in my life.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so at that time, I started incorporating it. And what was really crazy is like the more I started having eggs and stuff like salmon and just like, higher fatty foods that were animal based, I started like craving it. It was like as if I hadn't eaten before. Like I was, yeah, seriously craving it. It was
Same.
weird.
Same thing happened to me.
Yeah. And it was just like, what's going on? Like it felt like a big guilt thing. And I know this is something you relate to, like as far as feeling guilty for like wanting and enjoying animal foods. And this was like my entire
Yeah.
life. I was just like, no, my foundation is plant-based living and eating. And like my business is based on plant-based living and eating. And I need to, like, I'm a person who's supposed to be like embodying like plant-based thriving, and I felt so guilty
Mm.
that I was like feeling good on eating animal
Mm.
foods. um
Mhm.
and then at that time I also started dating my partner, and he is actually pretty big carnivore and specifically
Mhm.
like red meat. And
Mhm.
before that, I don't know if you know what In and Out is in Australia. Have you heard
No.
of it? Okay, In and
Haven't.
Out is like the big fast food chain in California, but also around the US, primarily in
Yeah.
California. And it's known for having the freshest burgers. So it's supposed to be like, you could call it like a little higher end, like not McDonald's, but like a classier
Mhm.
version of McDonald's. But
Mhm.
basically, I bring that up
Sounds
because
great.
yeah, I bring that up because the only kind of like red meat I had that I could remember was like an In-N-Out burger when I was younger. So like
Yeah.
I hadn't really experienced or ever good quality red meat and like in steak form. I just never like
Mhm.
even thought like, oh, I should try steak. Like I was pescatarian for years before being plant-based. So it was just something I didn't dive into. And then I tried a piece and then I tried a few more pieces. And oh my gosh, like it still sounds so weird to say it, but I was like legit salivating. And I was
Gosh, yeah.
what is going on? Like red meat is like no, it's like the antithesis. Like in India, like the cow is holy, so you just don't eat it. And everyone talks about red meat and heart disease. And I'm like, why is this? And like the fattier parts too, like it was just like, oh my gosh. Okay, so
Well,
fast
that's
forward. Yeah.
no, there's a war on health, right? And there's so much mixed information out there, and it's so hard to navigate. And it's unfortunately the world we live in, but that's where personal experience comes into such a big role with this. So it's just about being open to trying new things and really seeing in your own body what feels good. And that's what you've gone through. It's what I've gone through, where we've been told all of these, I'd say, lies about meat and its health effects, and a lot of studies that have bias and other intentions underlying them, right? And what's the most powerful is your own experience in your health. And you can even get that tested and see if you're someone who needs that factually on how good it is. But we'll dive all into the health components down the line. Sorry to interrupt you. Keep going.
No, no, you're good. And just one thing to add, like, I'm so big on self-experimentation. I would say like any of the stuff I do is like documenting my own journey versus
Mm-hmm.
like providing advice because I'm definitely not an expert. But
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I hate to say this, I feel like it's hard to call anyone an expert these days because diving
Mm-hmm.
into the research, so many of our studies that are like nutritional studies that are the foundation is completely based on like statistical errors and the big keyword here is like selectional bias, and
Mm-hmm.
selectional bias is basically when scientists or researchers have like an already planned out hypothesis, so they do an experiment to try to work in their favor. So like
Yeah.
one thing, diving into the specific study that was the foundation for saturated fat being really bad, and by the way, saturated fat is kind of like the big fat in animal fats. The foundation for that study that so many studies trickled from is completely wrong, and it doesn't have
Yeah.
like really any information to prove that the saturated fat was linked to eating animal foods, or sorry, not the
Yeah.
saturated fat but the high cholesterol and heart disease.
Yeah.
There's so many other factors because at the same time that people started having processed meats, people were smoking a lot of cigarettes, and they were like in the time that agriculture became huge. So like if you ever saw Wonder white bread, like literally the most processed white bread you could ever have, and so many other
Mm.
foods. So there's so many other factors, which is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but getting back to the transition, yeah, like the red meat, I was just like, whoa, what's going on? And like for a while, it was just like I felt so guilty, but I'm really big on transparency. So I slowly started to share, and I definitely like had like, what? You eat meat now? Like I miss when you used to be plant-based. And I was like, oh man. But I started just kind of getting deeper into it. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna eat without rules because one big focus I had is like I just didn't want to have any kind of supplements. I really
Mm.
didn't want, like I just felt like I'm like, what's going on? Like I'm focused on primal living, but so many of the stuff I'm eating are from like containers. So yeah, so
Mhm.
like I
Yeah.
got to a point where I'm like, wow, I like don't need to supplement to get the amount of protein I want. I'm feeling so satiated with fat. This is the first time ever where I'm not feeling like I'm a slave to sugar and my cravings. And
Yeah.
now looking back, I realize it's because I was like fully satiated. And for so long, for
Yeah.
literally like years, I just felt like so many sugar cravings. So that's basically how
And
this entire
that's
transition came about.
yeah, and that's incredible. And just the last point you said, that is huge because I think one of the big arguments people will have is that you can supplement. It's okay. Like there's supplements for it. And yeah, supplements, that's great. You can supplement, but we're talking about sustainability, right? And
Yeah.
it's really like supplements are not sustainable at the end of the day, and they're not empowering. If you can choose foods that are local, that are seasonal, that are, as close to your house as possible, like local farms and regenerative farms, like that are actually regenerating the earth, which assists with carbon capturing and reversing climate change and also regenerating the health of our soils, which is so depleted
Yeah.
from monocrop farming. Like all of that like is connected, and really using food as medicine. I think there's a big push, especially on a lot of naturopaths. I know a lot of naturopaths who just want to give out supplements. Like it's expensive for people, right? For clients and for patients if they have a consult with a naturopath and then they get prescribed like 5 plus supplements rather than just saying eat a high animal based diet and you don't need any supplements. Because I've also noticed in my own like practices that a lot of the supplements that are given, especially for gut health protocols and gut lining and gut sealing, they're all high in all of the nutrients that are in animal based foods.
Yeah.
So if you actually want to heal without having to spend so much money on supplements, adding animal foods into your diet can do, it's a therapeutic dose of a lot of the nutrients that are in these supplements, which blew my mind away the more I studied that side of things. So I was in the same boat as you, where I was doing a gut healing protocol and I had all of the supplements that I've been taught to use on our patients as well. And then I just realized all of these are in meat in huge amounts. Why don't I just increase my meat as well? And then that, now I don't need to take these anymore, and it just feels better, and plus you get so much more than just what the supplements have in them.
Yeah, yeah, and talking about like just the affordability and stuff,
Yeah.
I've experienced like so many different things. Like I've experienced eating vegan where it actually feels more expensive. Like if you were to go to a vegan restaurant, some of them are like very expensive and I'm just like, whoa. And like they do an amazing job with the menu, but I'm like, it's like based off of rice and beans and lentils and legumes, like these are the
Yeah.
cheapest ingredients, you know, and very
Yeah.
like not nutritionally dense. But also like doing groceries, if you do groceries with like a whole food plant-based way of eating, each specific ingredients maybe only a few dollars. So yes, like a lot of them are cheaper individually, but you end up coming home with like 100 different ingredients, and then like your fridge is full with like so many different things, and we're taught like all of the different colors. But I'm like, what country or city like naturally can grow all of these things? These are all imported from so
Mm,
many different places, so sustainably not
mm,
sustainable. And then even like for me, like we've we've been in such a world where everything's trying to be cheap, 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 so more people buy and kind of get addicted to it.
mhm,
But
mhm,
meat is not supposed to be cheap. Like if you think about the life cycle, like there's a reason why, you know, like meat could be more of like a delicacy because it goes through its entire life cycle. It does take resources. So it's not supposed to be
mm,
like a $1 McDonald's burger. That's pretty
mm,
absurd. It's supposed to
mm,
be maybe you're spending more on that, but because you're getting all of your nutrients, then you can actually spend way less on all the other ingredients. And
mm,
a lot of people who do want to do this, like even if it's like weight loss or muscle or whatever that is, like they actually find that they feel so satiated with a lesser amount of calories because they're getting so much more nutrients. Whereas I
mm,
remember when I was plant based, like I would eat everything that I tracked. Like I would track my food sometimes still. And
mm,
even if I met all of my goals on paper, the nutrients was just not that dense. So I would still have so many cravings. And then like that led
mhm.
to like my background with like binging and just not feeling satiated with food and like
Yeah.
having that be like, like my animal brain and scarcity mindset really
Mhm.
suffering.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just to touch on the health improvements that we've both felt is probably important, and also just to
Yeah.
dive a bit deeper into sustainability after, in case people don't really understand. I think the first question a lot of people have when you advocate for an animal-based diet is that possibly can't be good for the earth and also the animals, and so like we'll get into that a little bit as well. But yeah, if you can share a bit of the health improvements that you've noticed. I know they weren't intentional, but you've just happened to reap all of the incredible benefits that this comes along with. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah. So I think a lot of the stuff I deal with is maybe so relatable to, I think guys too, but a lot of women. And it's those things that like maybe just bug us for years. And it's those things that maybe we've just like normalized as an issue that we need to deal with, or maybe we put to the side. And like I mentioned, like I kind of like transitioned accidentally into this, but the
Mm-hmm.
healing that I've gotten from all of these benefits, I'm just like, whoa, like I didn't have to suffer from all of these for so long. So one of the biggest things right off the bat, I would say, is like the cravings and the satiety, and
Mm-hmm.
just feeling like food had a control over me. And then after like incorporating animal foods, like just so much satiety that I felt, where I was like, I'm actually okay. Like, I don't need to keep eating, because I was trying to like look for nutrients that I wasn't getting for so long. Um,
Yeah.
Also, for like our menstrual cycles, I was just
Mm-hmm.
dealing with really irregular cycles for just so long. And
Mm-hmm.
I, it could have been many elements, like I had been on birth control for a while, but even after 2 years being off of it, it was still like messing, like my cycle was still all over the place. There was a time where I was training a lot, like weightlifting and training, and then a
Mm-hmm.
combination of trying to like cut calories, but it was nowhere close to the amount that like people would usually do to like really lose a period. So mine was just
Yeah.
sporadic and irregular. And um again, coming back to primal roots, I really wanted to be like more in sync, because when your period's in
Mm.
sync, like you're also more connected to nature. So
Yeah.
like my period, after just a few months of incorporating animal foods, like almost immediately not only came back, but was regular. And so literally since January, where I was like seriously full on incorporating animal foods, like not
Mm-hmm.
only is it a regular cycle, it, like I always tell people, because I get so stoked, like it comes on the full moon every month. So, and like the flow, like period flow is healthy, and like everything is very doable. And I think as far as like being a woman, like I just feel like very more like feminine, like even with
Yeah.
like sex drive, that's very healthy, and with
Mm-hmm.
just feeling like everything's more regulated energy wise. And that was really big for me, because I think like women kind of shake that off, but it's something that like it's what makes you feel like feminine and good about
Yeah.
yourself, and that
Yeah.
security is so important.
Yeah. And yeah, that's amazing. And I've gone through the same experience, and I think it's been incredible as well for me to witness, because I was plant-based. As I was plant-based, I was the same. I came off the contraceptive pill, and then I was trying to rebalance my hormones. And at the time I was plant-based, I managed to rebalance them, and I thought that my hormonal cycle was healthy. I had a few symptoms here and there of different things. Had a bit of PMS. I'd get sometimes a little bit of cramping and just different things coming on here and there. It wasn't fully on the dot regular, there was, but it seemed healthy overall, especially even from a naturopathic perspective. It seemed like a pretty good cycle. But then when I began adding animal foods into my diet, and really actually I did a month of full carnivore, since then, I had no idea that your cycle could be this incredibly on the money, like on the dot every month, zero symptoms at all. Like
Yeah.
everything is just regulated, and we're conditioned as women to not only hate our cycles, but think that it's normal to get PMS, to get all of these kind of things. And yes, you can rebalance them like in other ways, but I've experimented with so many diets the past years, and I have never felt this good in my cycle as I have being primarily carnivore based. And I think that that is huge, because we deserve to experience that as women. And it's so empowering just knowing that your body is just getting everything that it needs, because protein is so much more than protein. You can look at it from a macronutrient base, like protein, carbohydrates, and fats. But within proteins, you have so much more like amino acids that just like all the fats, everything. They do incredible things for your cycle regulation. And obviously the minerals, right? The minerals and the nutrients, which are just absolutely abundant in animal foods, like is like a supplement in itself. And when you're getting such high doses of nutrients every single meal, when you focus on animal foods, your nutrient levels all just maximize and replenish. And you're also getting all the fat and protein that you need, that it just automatically kind of creates a balance in your body. And it's really amazing to witness in your own self. It's actually like a miracle to witness in your own self. And this is one of the reasons why I want to talk about this and spread it like on Instagram. Why I've started talking about it is because I want women to thrive, and I want people to thrive in their health, and to see that you know, experience the same thing. And so many women and males as well I've seen online have gone through the same thing, even though it's so counterintuitive to what science does say. And there's a lot about the gut that we'll, I think, dive into probably in another live.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, hormones is huge, and sleep too, right? Tell me a bit about your sleep, because I know my sleep is just, especially the month I did carnival, I was having the best sleeps that I ever had in my life. It's like my body just synced to this, my circadian, I can never say that word.
Circadian rhythm.
Circadian rhythm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something about it where it's like eating animal based connects you actually with the earth and the cycles of nature in a way that plant based never did for me. And you know, it's a connection that is just profound. And I think it is primal. Like it goes back
Yeah.
to, we're actually eating earth too. Like animal foods are medicine. They're also of earth, and they are so therapeutic where you can see them literally as supplements, like in real form food, with everything that your body needs, because it's true, they have everything your body needs. Like I think you did a video on like a piece of steak having all of the nutrients
All
that
of
you were
the
looking
nutrients
for
we need, and no one ever told me
compared
that.
to
Like,
plant.
yeah, like I just never, red meat was just demonized instead of like red meat has like all of the vitamin B's you need. It has iron, it has zinc, it has even vitamin C, it has like literally everything you need, but you know, so it's crazy. But yeah, for sleep, I've always been, you know, a light sleeper, and that's just something I classified myself as. And you know, I moved from California to now in Miami, Florida. And a big thing for me is like when it's hot, like as much as I like
Mm-hmm.
love getting in the sun and stuff, and I'm sure you have this, you know, weather similar in Australia, but when
Mm-hmm.
it's like humid hot, like, and I experience this in India too, which is also similar weather, but it's just a lot, and so it becomes extra difficult for me to sleep in, and we're not even
Mm.
like using the AC here. So I was like worried about that, but actually since eating this way, I am sleeping so good. Like I was never having dreams before, and I've been getting like deep dreams. And
Wow,
even with it being warm at night, so I can only imagine like how good I can sleep if I was in like more air conditioning.
that's
And also
amazing.
like you know, I'm a big fan of like it being pitch black, which we're working on the shutters here because there's still so much light coming in. But
Yeah,
even with all of those, like I still feel like I'm sleeping so much better. And so that was like, you know, I feel like my body literally signals me like there's a time where like I'm really high energy, and all of a sudden like it's time to sleep, and like I'm just like all right. And then when I
yeah,
wake up, it's like all right, it's time to wake up. And um yeah, what you said is just far as like feeling so much more connected to the earth, and even spiritually, like I feel like this is allowed me to get into just like so much of a deeper connection. And one last thing you mentioned about benefits, because I think this could relate a lot to both men and women. But you know, for the longest time, like we're like said, okay, you need to use this product for your face, this product for your skin, like all of these things. And usually when I would break out, like I broke out a lot less than when I was younger, but I would still break out maybe before my cycle and my period, and I thought that was normal. But like in the past 3 months, like clearest skin I've ever had before, and just like better complexion. and
yeah,
um and yeah, so I think that's like an amazing like plus that both men and women can benefit from. And again, this is not just meat, it's like the good quality and eating really clean and like no
yeah,
processed foods. I think that makes a huge difference. Even
yeah.
taking out non-dairy milks, like I was so big on like oat milk, almond milk, like all these nut milks, and then you realize like not only is it unsustainable, but a nut doesn't naturally grow in the environment like that. I actually did incorporate just a little bit of dairy to see how I'd feel. And I was so scared. Just, I did it as an experiment, but I was so scared that I'd break out because everyone's like, if you have dairy, you're going to break out. But I was making
Mm,
sure I was getting like really raw, whether it was like goat milk yogurt or like raw cheese or something like that, and
mm,
keeping it in the rawest whole form. And like I was totally fine. In fact, like I think it helped with my gut a little bit, especially the yogurt. So
Mm.
that's just a side note because I thought that was just so interesting. Like it was opposed to like everything we'd been taught. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Because a lot of the studies, that advocate that meat is bad for you, they don't really isolate people eating high quality meat. And also spiritually, like ethical meat, I think that's huge, because if you're eating diseased meat, if you're eating meat that's in fear its whole life, if you're eating caged foods and all of, you're going to eat the disease too. Like these meats already are high in cancer and different diseases within themselves. And I have not found a single study that actually isolates for if ethical meats, people just eating like ethically based meat, cause all these problems, and also taking out all of the processed junk food. Like they don't do that. So it's just kind of really misguided to be saying and pushing on people that meat causes cancers and heart diseases when there actually isn't evidence to show that, like in any way that properly isolates these different variables that could be playing a role. And if you look back onto it, I know I can't say exactly where this study came from, but it was one I read months ago just for an assignment that we had, and it was on like a primal diet, and talking about how they didn't have um, any kind of heart disease at the time. I'll have to bring it up and like share it next time again properly in depth. But yeah, it's just it. Yeah, there's so much misinformation there, and once you
yeah,
start feeling it in your own self, it just really reinforces that as well. And just meat
yeah,
quality is huge. Meat quality, like grass fed, grass finished, it changes the proteins and the fats in the meat. The fat in meat actually looks different if it's been grain fed versus grass fed. And the quality, the vitamins inside it there's way more vitamins and nutrients inside of it. So if you're advocating to eat meat, yeah, both of us agree that we really reckon getting high quality grass fed and grass finished ethical meats, if you can, regenerative farmed meats, because that makes a huge difference. And I still believe that if you eat factory farmed meat, not only is it unethical, but it would likely also cause disease long term later in life.
yeah. And one thing you kind of everything you mentioned, if you're familiar with the term epidemiology, this is like a really big one. That basically
Mm,
it's just the idea that if you think about all of the studies that have been done, if you take
mm-hmm,
the average person, who's like eating, burgers or tacos or just, the normal way you see meat being eaten, it's usually with
mm-hmm,
gluten, like wheat, processed
mm-hmm,
refined carbs, maybe some
mm-hmm,
french fries, maybe even if they
mm-hmm,
think they're being healthy with like healthy spaghetti, but then it's like
mm-hmm,
meatballs. And
mm-hmm,
and most likely those people are not doing like optimal exercise and living a healthy lifestyle. Whereas if you take the
yeah.
studies of someone who is eating, let's say, plant-based, and you could assume that there may be more health conscious, and maybe these people who are eating more plant-based are like doing yoga or exercising or trying to work on their sleep and circadian rhythm. So as you
Mm,
can see, like both studies are going to be really skewed because um, there's not the same variables, and that's where the epidemiology component is like these people who are plant-based are actually living a healthier lifestyle, whereas the people
mm,
who are eating processed meats are eating or living like an unhealthy lifestyle. So
mm,
the results aren't going to be fair. There really are only now, I think, people trying to do more studies on people eating like properly raised, like not processed meat, who are leading a healthy lifestyle.
mm,
And we are yet to see those results because for so long we've been like associating the any studies on meats with like cholesterol and heart disease and all these things, but we're relating those to like processed meats. So there's a really big like cognitive dissonance there. And so
mm,
that's really important to point out when talking
mm,
about studies. Like people always are like studies, 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 but I'm like, think about the selectional bias there. And if you're
yeah.
just eating something clean, it's probably going to be, a lot better for you. So I think like across the board, whatever you're eating, the number one food rule, or like the only one I would say, is like eat whole, unprocessed foods that are as local to you, and ask yourself like, does this grow, or is this here on the land that I'm living on? Um,
Yeah.
I saw something the other day, because even fruits are seasonal, even if we are like eating more primal and eating some fruits. But, for example, like cows are not seasonal. There's actually a version of some kind of ruminant in every part of the world. So whether that's bison
Mm,
running around, or whether that's like sheep and goat in certain
mm,
areas, or whether that is like yaks in colder parts
mm-hmm.
of the world. So I
Mm.
thought that was like a big,
That's
switch for
interesting.
me. Yeah.
It's interesting. It's like it is the most sustainable and like consistent food base in our diet, whether it's winter or whatever season, you always have animals. And just to bring that in, because we've both gone through the journey of going plant-based to eating meat, and for me that was a real journey where I had a lot of guilt in that process and shame that I'd put on myself, and belief that I was, eat like, lowering my vibration, so to speak, if I were to eat
Mm.
meat, or that my emotional well-being would, be it have shifts and all of that. And since I've kind of come to terms with that and healed that and realized how much of that was societal beliefs on me too. And um, I'm just curious with your journey, how, because you're the primal yogi, you're a yogi advocate, you're a yogi teacher, and the yogi way of life doesn't really advocate meat. So how do you kind of justify, what's your process been with integrating those two kind of what people might see as contradictions, I guess?
Yeah. So, um, you know, I think in yoga there's a really big term, and it's one of, you can call it kind of one of the philosophies of yoga, because yoga is a lot more than just the movement, it's a philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of those is called ahimsa, or non-suffering. So I've
Mm-hmm.
definitely heard and seen a lot of people say, well, if you kill an animal, you're causing suffering. And so, there's so many layers to that, because it's a little bit ignorant to think that just by not eating meat, you're not partaking in suffering. Because in a way, you can say, like, if I was dealing with so many symptoms, or if you were, we're dealing with our own suffering, and not acknowledging our own suffering, or whatever we're dealing with, is kind of harming ourselves in a way. And if something
Mm-hmm.
was, providing us healing, first of all, that just makes sense primally, but also, like, that should be our birthright, to be able to like eat whatever we need to be able to heal, because if we're not healed, then we can't provide healing to the collective. So just by us healing
100%.
ourselves, the entire collective is going to be healed. um,
Yes.
one other thing I think is really important. So people go vegan for three big reasons. First, they've come across some research, most likely that meat is relating to heart disease, so they do it for health. The second one is more sustainability wise, which is a big reason I went plant based. And then the third is ethical, which is one of the big ones. And it's a really big distinction between people who are plant based for like ethical, just like, I don't want to, participate in the killing of an animal, period, versus like health and sustainability and some of those other reasons.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is that all of these things are really interconnected. Like if you are, causing suffering to animal or not, that's going to be related to the environment, which is also going to be related to your health. If your health is not okay, like I mentioned, like if you're not providing healing for yourself, then you can't take care of the environment, and you can't take care of the animals coexisting in it. It's
Mm-hmm.
all really, interrelated. And the environment has plants in it, and these plants have animals that feed off of it. Like it's also interconnected. So
Mm-hmm.
even with, I just listened to a podcast the other day, like a farmer who's growing avocados, right? These aren't even grains
Mm-hmm.
or corn that's being fed to processed meats and animals.
Mhm,
It's like avocados are something that we abundantly eat. But even with
mhm,
these avocados, 20 to 40 acres, this farmer has to kill at least 30,000 to 40,000 gophers, has to kill a bunch of rabbits and bees. And so,
mm,
regardless, if you're doing monocrop agriculture, there's no way you can do that. My friend the other day, I was talking to her, and she's growing tomatoes just in her garden, which is amazing. But she said out of the 50 tomatoes she, got to grow, from like the bugs eating them and from the rabbits eating them, she probably only got like 6 tomatoes for herself.
Yeah,
So like
yeah,
obviously she's not going to go out of her way in her small garden to kill any of these, and it's not in her
yeah,
philosophy to. But a farmer that actually needs to make money off these tomatoes that he's selling to the grocery store, he's definitely going to do anything it takes to make sure he gets his yield. And so it's
yeah,
very ignorant to think like, oh, just because you're not eating meat, you're not contributing to this. And just the last thing to bring that in, if you're opting in for regenerative, then you are opting in for a farm that is, adhering to kind of working with an ecosystem that is coexisting together. That means no animals are
yeah.
being killed, and these animals are eating what they were ancestrally supposed to eat. So cows are not being fed
Mm,
like grains and corn, they're eating grass, and because they're eating grass, they don't need to put pesticides on it to kill, the bugs, because the cows are grazing on it. And if there's
mm,
chickens or different egg, the eggs that they're, the pasture grown eggs, or if it's sheep or goat, like all of these things are coexisting. And because there's no unnatural form of agriculture, this is literally restoring and regenerating the earth to what it was. There doesn't
mm.
need to be any excess animal killing besides the animals that are actually being killed for meat, who are also living like to a longer extent. So you're to go as far as to say that if you're eating totally regenerative, you're actually going to be more sustainable and kill off less animals, like save more animal lives, than eating a full-on vegan diet. I know that sounds like mind-blowing, but it's so true.
It's mind blowing. It really is mind blowing when you wrap your head around it. And I think you made
Yes.
so many good points there, like so many good points. Um, Also, just because my partner and I earlier this year, we were looking at buying land because we wanted to start a sustainable farm of our own. And we were first looking into starting a market garden. And then we started looking into regenerative agriculture as well. But we were blown away because when we were calculating, everything we needed and just like all the stuff that we needed to move forward with this idea, the market garden was the least sustainable part of the business model. And the market garden took the most amount of water, which is what people think, that animal agriculture takes more water than vegetables. But do you realize how much water it takes to actually make these vegetables grow? And if you actually, create the foundations of a proper regenerative farm, it is based off of symbiosis with the environment, like you said, and they do plan out the water systems to feed the animals based, like there's just so much that goes into it, and the architecture behind the actual grazing patterns and everything that makes the water like really effective, and using the least amount. I think there's a statistic that regen agriculture, if done properly, can use up to 80% less water than like, vegetable farming,
Yeah.
which is huge as well from the sustainability side. And also just the fact that animals, a lot of these animals, these farmed animals, they've been domesticated so many years. Um, and a lot of them would not survive without the farmers. And I think that's the big point, that there's this symbiotic relationship between the farmers and the animals that is something I haven't witnessed until I started looking into it and seeing the connection that these farms had. And a lot of vegetables that we eat, the reason that they are so toxic is that over time they've actually changed. Like since agriculture started, these vegetables didn't exist. And animals is the closest thing you can get to trusting that they're in its pure form for human consumption, because farming and agriculture has changed the actual quality of so many vegetables and fruits as well, that it's just impossible to actually buy a vegetable now that is the same as what it was in the wild. Like half the vegetables we eat didn't actually exist, like I don't know, 200 years ago, right? They're experiments since the agricultural revolution, which started, I don't know the exact when that started, but we have way more history of human civilization before the agricultural industry. And it could be argued that a lot of health problems began since the agricultural industry began and we started monocropping vegetables, fruits, and, you know, getting further away from just eating what is most bioavailable to the species, like the human species, which is all to do with our gut lining and how we absorb nutrients, which just is a whole different story when it comes to a lot of these vegetables, which is why eating carnivore is so healing for so many people and it's becoming more popular, in my opinion.
I agree. I agree. And I think like where the awareness is, and I'm so happy like we're able to share this. It's like so many people are already eating meat. And maybe people who are plant based are open to it, but it's like there's kind of a right way to do it. And coming back to like the yoga perspective,
Mm.
um, everything you mentioned, it's like that that connection we have with nature is almost completely gone. It's why I say,
Mm.
like, if you're next to a body of water, make sure you spend time like going into the ocean or going into the lake or the river. And back in the day, like we used to hunt these animals and we used to like not just use the meat, but we used to use the bone and the bone marrow and the skin and the everything. And we were so much more
Mm.
connected to the entire process and appreciated it. Whereas now, whether it's an animal in the form of like a burger you're getting in a drive through or just chicken you're picking up at the grocery store, or even if it's spinach or vegetables, like there's such a process there and we have just completely like
Mm.
minimized it, and that's okay. Like that is just the evolution of humans, and there's so many of us and we live in big cities where we don't have that space for every single person to have a farm. But I think it is in our best investment to spend on regenerative farms and the products that they have, whether it's animal meats or even if it's someone local growing fruit versus like contributing it to mass production of. Do you guys have Costco in Australia? Yeah, you have Costco. You don't.
No, but I do
Okay,
know
Costco, yeah,
of it.
it's like a big warehouse where everything's more discounted, but like walking into a Costco and seeing how much like the bulk that they sell vegetables and fruits in, and I'm like, yo, this is not naturally abundant on earth like this. Like there's no way you could get this big of a
That's
bag of
it.
power greens. And I feel
Yeah.
like you'll resonate with this a lot, but I read this the other day in my anthropology book actually, and it's basically the idea that if we are having any plant foods, that it is in our best interest to have fruits, but like also seasonal fruits, because if you think about it, fruits are anything with seeds in them, and that is kind of like the natural reproductive opportunity for the fruit, because when we eat it, like not that we poop on the ground anymore,
Yeah.
but like that's how the seeds get spread. But if you think about how a plant
Yeah.
grows, it's not in our favor to eat the leaves or like the leafy, stalky part of it. Because if you think about photosynthesis and the way that a plant grows, the leaves are the ones taking in the sun to obtain the nutrients to grow. So if we're eating the leaves, what do you think is going to happen to the plant eventually? Like they can't obtain the nutrients from the leaves anymore, so the plant's going to die. So it literally doesn't make sense evolutionarily even for the plant. The plant's defense mechanism is going to be the toxins, but just like you said,
Yeah.
we've bred like
Yeah.
vegetables like broccoli or carrots, but there was no such thing as those, way back.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And and just to add on to that, like just from a herbalist perspective too, because obviously we're big advocates of eating different plants as medicine, right? And there's a lot of leaves that, they'll have bitter qualities, which we advocate to eat before you start eating food that help your gastric juices go and such and such. And these toxins that are in plants, like a lot of medicines are toxic in certain amounts, right? And I see plants as being medicinal for a purpose. And that's how they've always been used, right? And we can use them medicinally and they can be added on. But it's more so vegetables, right, that we're really speaking about, because fruits, they don't have these phytates, they don't have these plant toxins. Ancestrally, they were eaten alongside, they have digestive enzymes in them, they have a whole range of different components. But a lot of vegetables, which also have medicinal qualities, um, they they are used for a purpose with medicine. And otherwise it's not like you overindulge on all of them your whole life for the, you know, the rest of your life like that, and just them. You know.
Yeah.
I think there's just a distinguish that we're still making and figuring out. Like it's really just figuring out the truth, really, right? Like that's the journey we're on.
Yeah, it's just like that pursuit of
Yeah.
figuring out the truth. And I really think like until we've tried one thing, we can't kind of judge it or have any like thoughts about it because, you know, we haven't tried it. And I
Yeah.
think I'm sure like your
Yeah.
appreciation for plants, whether it's herbs or fruits and even vegetables, like probably increased so much after doing carnivore for a month because experiencing like the full on elimination diet.
Yeah.
You know, for me, like
Yeah.
coming from a place where I was trying to heal my relationship with food, like fruit is like very easy to binge on because it's just a straight
Yeah.
carb and sugar. So like I was at a place where like if there was fruit in the house, like even while I was transitioning to animal based, I would have like dates and figs, like I would have so much.
Yeah.
But now I'm at a place like having experienced almost cutting it out, I'm like, wow, like just two pieces of like two dates or just a one peach or something could be like so much vital energy, like quick energy that I could use for like performance, or it could be an amazing thing for like digestive enzymes and breakdown, which I know we'll get into in a different live because I know this will be really awesome to
Mm.
talk about as far as gut health. And also like if you're doing more animal based and primal eating, but you know what quantity and how much and how we should use, you know, plants and herbs is more of a medicine rather than the foundation that we were taught for. Like the foundation of our food shouldn't necessarily
Mm.
be, you know, all of these vegetables or green leaves. But yeah, the meat as medicine, I think creating that very spiritual relationship with it is important, and realizing like, hey, I'm a
Mm.
part of this life cycle, and maybe even doing like a mini meditation before it and being like, hey, like I'm appreciating
Mm.
all of the life and the resources that went into this, and this is going to nourish me, and I'm going to feel so good, you know, for hours or like even the whole day just from like this one piece of meat. I
Yeah.
think that changes so many things, you know.
100%, 100%.
Yeah.
Definitely, it's enhanced my own connection with my food like fourfold, you know. And also, I think that herbs and meat just go so well together. They're made for each other. And then add fruits into the mix, and fruits were made for meat digestion. Like it just all makes sense the more you look into it. These foods that are primal foods, they're foods that ancestrally we ate. You know, we didn't eat nuts, we didn't eat grains. How can, you know, you can harvest like one piece of rice if you found the rice plant in the wild, right? It's not like you could you had all
Yeah.
of these rice fields everywhere, and same with nuts and seeds. We couldn't soak them like legumes that really hard to digest in your gut. But it's just these primal based foods, they seem to work together so well. They seem to just kind of like, and a lot of people do a purely carnivore based diet as an elimination diet to start with, and I think that that's actually a really great way to connect with the meat, because when I had my carnivore month, it really reconnected me to meat and was like a reset, right? That I never had connected to my food and just death, like to death. And you know, yes, I'm eating a dead animal, and yes, that's part of life. That's part of life cycle, and you know, we can try and deny that our whole lives. I mean, I'd say that we live in a time that is so disconnected from the cycles of life and from death. But if anything, going on this journey has brought me closer to life itself more than I ever have been, through eating meat and connecting with the meat and blessing the meat and saying thanks for the meat in ways that I never thanked the vegetables. And I think that
Yeah.
like that's a huge part of it too. It's a very sacred diet, it's a very sacred journey, and it really connects you in so many ways that we've talked about, and so much more to dive into.
Yeah, I
Not enough
know.
time.
Yeah. It was so good to talk about all these topics, and I really appreciate your focus on sustainability and, you know, like the spiritual side of it and the connection and viewing everything as
Yeah.
medicine, and then also like taking it back to our ancestral and primal roots, because like
Yeah.
aside from all the information that's out there, like we've had the blueprint our entire lives, and it's like, what did our
Yeah.
ancestors eat, or our closest like primate ancestors, you know? Like
Mm.
it's right there. And just like you said, the meat and the herbs and the fruits like really coexist so much. And if you think about even like herbs and fruits, like the senses, like the smell, the look, the touch of it, it all
Mm.
is intriguing to us. I don't know if we would have like wanted to smell a broccoli, or like it intrigued us back in the day, right? So it's
Yeah.
just like using our common sense,
Yeah.
and then just providing like all the healing through this. So thank you so much
Yeah.
for having me on. And like yeah, I love conversating with you. I can't wait for more of these.
Can't wait for more. And thank you so much as well for sharing your journey and just the work that you're doing, everything that you share and the whole, everything. I love the way that you package it. I love the way you share your journey so authentically. I think it's such an important topic to talk about. And I can't wait for more chats with you. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks
Yeah.
for everyone who tuned
Thank
in.
you.